Week 10 of the fantasy football season. Here's a few kickers I looked at off the wire this week. The first guy, Graham Gano of the New York Giants. So Graham Gano is having a great season, no doubt about it, this year here for the Giant team. A team that settles for a lot of field goals. Doesn't really have a playmaker on the offense besides Saquon Barkley, obviously. And it's been paying dividends for Graham Gano, a top 10 scorer and kicker this season. So right now he's available in tons of fantasy leagues coming off his bye week in 74% of leagues. And the last few games here for him, week 6 versus Baltimore 6, week 7 at Jacksonville 11, and week 8 at Seattle 8. So right now with a good matchup in week 10 versus Houston, that gives up the 5th most fantasy points to kickers on the season. He's definitely a kicker I would go out there and add this week. The next guy, Matt Gay of Los Angeles Rams. So Gay coming off his bye week a couple weeks ago as well. Numbers haven't been all that great, but he's got a couple favorable matchups coming up. Week 10 versus Arizona and week 11 in New Orleans. That gives up the 2nd most fantasy points to kickers on the season. So right now, this Ram offense, they've definitely been struggling, no doubt about it. Not getting the job done. And Matt Gay right now available in tons of fantasy leagues here at 62% of leagues. The last few games, week 6 versus Carolina 6, week 8 versus San Francisco 2, and week 9 at Tampa 7. So right now, something's got to give with Matt Gay. It was good to see him have a 7-point game at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And like I said, the next two matchups, I think he could be decent. And he's available widely in 62% of leagues. The next guy's Will Lutz of the New Orleans Saints. So Will Lutz, he's a guy I've been mentioning for weeks on end. And he's another guy that's putting up fantasy numbers this season. Here's Will Lutz. And the good thing as well, his bye week's not till week 14. So the last few weeks here for Lutz. Week 6 versus Cincinnati 14. Week 7 at Arizona 11. Week 8 versus the Vegas Raiders 6. And at the time of recording this video, he still hasn't played yet on Monday Night Football versus Baltimore. But week 10 at Pittsburgh, a good matchup. And week 11 versus the Rams back home, once again, a good matchup. So good matchups coming up here for Lutz. Bye week 14, like I mentioned here. And like I said, he's at double-digit fantasy points the last 2 out of 3 ball games. So right now, this Saint team's another offense that don't score a lot of touchdowns, and they got to settle for field goals, and he's available in 70% of fantasy leagues. And a kicker I would add this week, the next kicker is Jason Sanders of the Miami Dolphins. I know his numbers haven't been great this season, but he's on a high-powered offense, obviously, as Sanders, where they're getting opportunities. He's getting minimum 4 or 5 extra points weekly, and if he could just add a field goal on top of that, he's going to get 8 to 10 fantasy points as well. So the last few weeks here for Sanders, week 7 versus Pittsburgh 12, week 8 at Detroit 8, and week 9 at Chicago 5. So right now, good matchup week 10 versus the Cleveland Browns, where I could see this Miami Dolphin offense in the red zone a decent amount and score a few touchdowns as well. Obviously, I know they go on bye in week 11, but there's a streaming option this week here versus Cleveland. It's a good option that they give up the 14th most fantasy points to kickers on the season. And Sanders right now, he's available in 78% of fantasy leagues. And the 5th and final kick I looked at on the wire this week's Brett Maher of the Dallas Cowboys. So coming off bye week and a few struggling weeks here for Maher. He's available in tons of leagues at 82% of leagues. And the last few weeks here for him, week 5 at the Rams 11, week 6 at Philly 5, week 7 versus Detroit 6, and week 8 versus Chicago 7. So right now, good matchup on paper, week 10 at Green Bay. A bend but don't break defense. And they give up the 9th most fantasy points to kickers on the season. And this Cowboy team's getting healthy. Obviously, Prescott's been back over the last couple weeks. CeeDee Lamb, he's been playing decent. Michael Gallup, he's been back the last few weeks. Only Zeke, really the only guy banged up. And James Washington, a deep ball threat, he should be back as well any week now, coming off his foot injury. So right now, this Cowboy team should be getting more opportunities. And they got a couple games where they could put up points versus mediocre defenses coming up at Green Bay, Minnesota, and the Giants. So right now, more available, like I said, in 82% of fantasy leagues. And his kicker I will look to give an add to this week. So that's a few kicks I looked to add off the wire for week 10 of the fantasy football season.